Welcome back, everybody. As you can see, the block is back from the machine shop, so super happy about that. So today we'll talk a little bit about what all had to be done. It was originally going to be just a quick 5 thou overbore to put in the new diamond pistons, new forged pistons, and forged rods. Unfortunately, I had 4 cracked liners. So that being said, I had to decide, where do I go from here? Do I go iron block? Do I try to sleeve it? What kind of sleeves do I use? Do I try to use factory sleeves? Do I try to go Darton or power bore or something like that? So we'll talk about what I did, when a little closer up view of what all had to be done with the block. But the block is fixed. It was sleeved. And today I'm going to put the ARP main studs in. I'm going to put the bearings in, check for clearance on the mains to the crank. The crank has been balanced with the new rotating assembly. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But for now, I'm going to put the main studs in and put the bearings in and check the clearances. And yeah, we'll go from there. Okay, so what all had to be done? Well, as you can see, I got some nice new sleeves in the block. So this is my LSA block, and I had 4 split factory liners. So instead of trying to replace just the 4 split liners and bore the other 4 out, I just decided I'm gonna change all the liners out, and I'm not going to run factory liners or run a real thin melling liner or something like this. I originally was looking into Darton sleeves, Darton mid sleeves or something like that. I decided to go with the power bore sleeves. It's not a mid sleeve. So these are power bore, and they come bored to 4.060, and you can bore them out to 4.125 if you want to build a big bore stroker or something like that. But I did find a local machine shop here in Red Deer that were able to machine out all my old sleeves, and I did order these from Power Bore in the States. Took about a couple weeks to get them up to me here in Alberta, and they turned out really nice. I'm super happy with them. They're just they look good, and they are flanged, so they are, you know, one cylinder meets up with the other, so this side is flat, and they all interlock and should really improve the block rigidity and really stiffen up this LSA block. And talking to the machine shop, when they were boring the old ones out, the amount of inconsistency from bore to bore to bore on the factory GM ones were pretty bad, he said. He said the just how off center the actual bores are to the block was pretty bad. So this was all machined out on the CNC machine, and you know, super happy with it. Also, once they were bored out and installed, the deck was surfaced and then line honed. So we'll flip it over and have a look at the bottom side of the sleeves. So here you can see kind of the bottom side and really see how thick those liners are. So these are pretty beefy liners compared to the factory GM LSA liners, which are, well, they just don't hold up to the amount of boost I put into it. It only had about 16 pounds of boost, but they weren't designed for that much boost for that amount of time and the boost I put into it. So that's took some time and some money, but it's fixed, and I decided to go this way because I wanted to stay with an aluminum block versus an iron block. I didn't want the extra weight on the nose of the car. So yeah, pretty happy with it. So now I'm going to set the camera up here and go ahead and put in the ARP stud kit that I got, and the king bearings, place them in place, and check for clearance for the crank bearings. So like I was saying, next thing is I'm going to put the main studs in. So obviously the mains, after hogging out the block and putting the sleeves in, I did have the ARP studs installed and the mains re-honed for alignment, making sure it was good and straight again, just in case anything shifted. And those should all still be within factory spec. I shouldn't need oversized bearings, but we'll see. I also did, while I was in here, cam bearings looked fine, but I opted to put in a brand new set of GM LSA bearings. I could have went Cleveite 77 or something like that, but from everything I read, the GM LSA bearings are actually some of the best tolerance cam bearings. So those are been installed too when it was at the machine shop. I also did have my LSA heads planed, and just enough. I think they only took a thou off to just kind of resurface those as well, just so that everything is perfectly fresh for reassembly. So I'm going to now put in the studs and put the bearings in. So I got the bearings put in, the caps as well, the main caps. So I cleaned the bearings really good, the saddles themselves. And when I was putting the bearings in, I tried to set the locator tab in and kind of push it in without rocking it. And I didn't want to peel up any of the bearing material up on any sharp edges. So I just kind of tried to compress and push in at the same time while keeping the bearing located with the locator tabs. So I'm going to put them on, torque them down, take some measurements with the dial bore gauge, and then I'll also measure, I'll torque them down first, then I'll measure my crankshaft journals and set up my dial bore gauge to check clearances on the main journals. So when you're installing your mains, you want to make sure, obviously, everything is pointing the right direction. Make sure everything's nice and clean. Carefully slide them down. This is number 5. Looks good. Number 4. Number 3 with the thrust bearing. number 2. There it goes. So I'll put my moly lube on to my threads, the bottom of the top side of my washers, and torque them down. I'm gonna tap them on with a soft blow hammer and torque them up to sequence, and then I'm gonna go and measure up my crankshaft journals and check clearances. So the next thing I'm going to do is using my calipers. I did this off camera already, but I'm checking the size of the main journals on the crankshaft. So this is my crankshaft. This is the factory crankshaft that I had balanced with my new pistons and rods. And as you can see, they had to add some heavy metal to the crankshaft at the front and at the back. So it's all balanced, it's been polished, it's good to go. They didn't have to turn any of the journals, they just said that they polished it, so I'm just checking. And I had it kind of set up. So when you're measuring, you want to make sure you don't hit any of the oil holes in the crank itself to get your measurement. And this can be a little tricky trying to find the perfect size. So right at 2 inches, 559, which is the factory size for that journal. So that's right on spec. And then off camera, I took my dowel bore gauge and I chose the right anvil and washer that I need for the measurement. So basically I'm gonna just set it up, and the best way to do this is in the vise, so I'm gonna do that. So what I wanna do now is just kind of zero out my dowel bore gauge for my 2.559. To the size of my journal, so I can check my bearing clearances. Just adjust that just a hair. go. Okay, now I gotta check the bore on the bearings in the block. So then, now that this is set up, I'm gonna want to check my mains, inside diameter of my bearing. And I'm right at about 2 just over 2 thousandths of an inch. So right around 22 10,000ths. Careful not to put too much pressure on it and mar anything up. Yeah. That looks good there. So I'm 22 10,000ths of an inch, so pretty good. So 22 10,000ths on the mains, so that should be good. I'm gonna check it again, just for shits and giggles with plastic gauge once I get the crank in, but pretty happy with that. For bearing clearances on the main journals, I'm gonna check the other ones and just to make sure they're all close to the same. So now I know that my main bearing clearance is good. Next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the main caps off and I'm gonna install the LSA piston squirters. Before I go ahead and put the crankshaft in, so these are the piston squirters. And they sit down in here on the block. Let's see if I can get a shot of it. So basically what these do is they sit down in here. So that's just in there roughly like that. So what that does is it takes oil from the oil gallery on the LSA and the LS9s, and it squirts on the bottom of the piston skirt to help oiling and cooling. So, but to do that, to get those in and torque them to 15 foot-pounds, I'm gonna take the mains off again, put my oil squirters on, wipe everything off, make sure everything's good, lube up the bearings, put my crank in, set the thrust bearing, and check my crankshaft end play. So first things first, take the caps off and put the squirters in and torque them to spec. So oil squirters are installed, torqued, and I put some red paint marker on them just to remind myself, anything that I torque up on the motor, I'm gonna just put a little bit of red paint because I'm not gonna finish it all in one day. So I'm just gonna get the crank in today. So as of now, squirters need to be clearanced a little bit. There needs to be 8 thousandths of an inch clearance between the skirt of the piston and the cylinder liners, so I just had to tweak them a little bit. These liners seem to be just a hair longer than the factory ones. So just tweaked them a little bit, checked with the feeler gauge, made sure I had 8/1000ths of an inch clearance. Next, I'm going to put the crank in dry. I'm not going to rotate it, and I'm going to put my main caps on, and I'm going to use some plastic gauge and just double check and triple check my clearances. They all worked. They all look good at 22/10,000, so just over 2/1000ths of an inch. So 22/10,000ths for main clearance, but I'm just going to check it with some plastic gauge and see how accurate it is. Clean that up, pull the crank out, lube everything up again, and then lay the crank down for the last time and torque the mains down for the last time. So the mains are torqued to 15 foot-pounds. So now I got to set the thrust bearing on the number 3 main. So by doing that, once that's done, I'm going to pry the crankshaft forward to keep some preload on the thrust bearing, and then I can go ahead and torque the rest of them. So the way to do this is you drive your crankshaft forward, and I have a plastic dowel. Give her a whack. And then you drive it back again. So we go back and forth again. Good measure. Then I'm going to go to 30 foot-pounds. Keeping pressure on the number 3 thrust forward. I'm going to go torque it up the main to 60 foot-pounds, the inner on number 3, and once that's done I can take that pry bar out of there. With that done, I'll finish torquing the rest down in sequence to 60 on the inner, 50 on the outer, and then I'll install the side bolts, torque them to 20 foot-pounds with some RV sealant on the heads of the bolts. So the very last thing I need to check now is my crankshaft end plate. And I want about 5/1000 of an inch, roughly, crankshaft end plate. Being an aluminum block, trying to get a mag mount onto it, had to put a plate on it to the front cover here. Front cover bolt. So I set up my dial indicator and I am putting pressure on the crankshaft rearwards to zero it out, and then forward, and should get about 5/1000 of an inch. So I'll go backwards here. So that's 0, putting pressure on it rearwards. Letting it off again, just about 2 thou, and then forward. Right at 5 thou of an inch. So, perfect. Crankshaft end plays 5/1000 of an inch. It's within spec. I shouldn't have to, I'll check one more time. Shouldn't have to adjust my thrust bearing or anything, or rearward, forward, rearward, and forward. Yeah, right around 5, maybe 55 10/1000. It's pretty tough to tell when you're moving the whole thing, but right around 5/1000. It's a beauty. So that'll be my last check for the crank install. Well, that's a wrap for the crank install. Took a little longer than I thought, but I wanted to double check my measurements. Just took a long time setting up the dial bore gauge and everything, and making sure everything was perfect. The crank came in and out a couple times. Caps came on and off a few times. But it's all done, clearanced. I have about 22 10/1000 of an inch for main bearing clearance, and it's kind of where I wanted to be. Everything spins nice and freely. Oil squirters are back in, clearance as well for the power bore skirts. I got about 8/1000 of an inch clearance all the way around. So everything went really well, and I'm going to shut her down here for the evening. Just clean up, put everything away, and tomorrow I'm going to start working on gapping the piston rings with the ring filer, and hopefully banging some pistons here, double check clearances again on my rod journals to bearings, and probably button up the short block tomorrow. So hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.